All right. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Professor Jacob Goldberg, who is a former senior research fellow at the Dayan Center for Middle East Studies at Tel Aviv University and an advisor to former Prime Minister Ehud Barak. He is the author of The Foreign Policy of Saudi Arabia, The Formative Years, published in 1986, and he joins us to discuss the topic of understanding Mohammed bin Salman's Saudi Arabia. Mr. Goldberg will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, you can do so by using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Jacob Goldberg.
Thank you very much, Anaf. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to say to be here, but I know that you are there because I'm speaking from Israel, from Tel Aviv. I don't know how many of you noticed that in just 2 months, we will mark a whole decade since King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia died, and we became familiar with the new personality of Mohammed bin Salman, known since then as MbS. Now, I'm not here to just talk about facts, about anecdotes about MbS. I'm sure you all read that he is reckless, hasty, impulsive, aggressive, brutal, but also a big reformer. So I recall how in many of the papers I wrote several years ago about him, I refer to him as the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, speaking about a split personality representing both. But at the beginning of my topic tonight, I would like to present you with my thesis right from the beginning. I think that MbS is the first revolutionary, transformative leader in Saudi Arabia in no less than 3 generations. And you will see during my short talk, which is, by the way, the shortest I've ever given, what I mean by transformative and revolutionary and why in so many years. First of all, a few factual aspects. Number one, he is the first of the 3rd generation of the so-called grandchildren of Ibn Saud to be the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. Until now, all the rulers of Saudi Arabia from Ibn Saud's death in 1953 were his children, sons. MbS is the first grandson. Number two, just pay attention to his age. His 6 predecessors, so to speak, those after Ibn Saud, 6 brothers, when they ascended to the throne, their ages were the following. King Saud was 51. King Faisal was 59. King Khalid and King Fahd were 62 and 63. King Abdullah was 71. And King Salman, MbS's father, was 80. He's now 90, almost 90. In contradistinction, MbS became the de facto ruler when he was 29. He's now 39. So he has been in power virtually for almost a decade. In January, it will mark 10 years. And please ignore the fact that he became the formal crown prince only in 2017. For all practical purposes, he was really the decision maker from the very beginning of 2015 after King Abdullah died. His age means that he has a horizon, life expectancy, that none of his 6 predecessors have. From age 30, he can be actually the leader of Saudi Arabia for half a century, which is, by the way, what Ibn Saud, the grandfather, the legendary founder of the kingdom, was. He was 22 when he became the leader, and he was 73 when he died for 51 years. The third and last personal feature that I think was not mentioned enough, or was not even mentioned at all in the press, was that unlike all senior princes of his age who received education in the West, whether it's Georgetown or Texas or Boston or England, MbS studied only inside Saudi Arabia. So he wasn't exposed to Western education at all. And against this background of no exposure to Western education, what he has done in the last 10 years is all the more phenomenal, because he has been displaying a real understanding of the world outside. And he did not have this exposure during his studies. I will focus on 4 aspects, very briefly on each one of them, or 4, I would say, dimensions, to explain why he has been transformative and revolutionary. The first would be royal family. The second, the domestic politics of Saudi Arabia. The third would be the economy. And the fourth would be foreign relations, foreign policy of Saudi Arabia. And please note that there will be a big difference between the first 2 and the last 2. Starting with royal family politics. Why is he revolutionary? I already said that he was the first of the grandchildren generation, the first coming to power at this young age. But a lot more important is what he has done already. He has broken the basic principle that governed royal family dynamics for decades, the one called consensus. In Arabic, we use the term shura, majlis shura, consultation. He has been a leader onto his own without any participation of any other senior princes. And by doing that, he broke another principle, respect for age. In an abrupt way, he simply deposed the crown prince, Mohammed bin Naif, who was the crown prince for 2 years, a person who was almost 30 years his senior, and deposed him, and he has been since then virtually in house arrest. No consultation, no consensus, ruling all by himself. This is not only un-Saudi, it is the basic feature of the Saudi royal family politics. Not only that, but in 2017, he did something that I would have never expected, that something like this could happen. He arrested the most senior members of the royal family in the Ritz-Carlton, house arrest, interrogating them. Some said that some were even tortured to give back money. And we're talking huge amounts of money, billions of dollars back to the Saudi national coffers, and simply showing them that from now on, power is in my hands. The game has changed. It's a totally new ballgame. The net result is that the entire royal family is virtually to this day in a total state of shock. Perhaps on purpose, he adopted a shock therapy approach. They have been taken off balance. They have never faced anything like that in 75 years since Ibn Saud died. And the shock maybe is the reason why they haven't even tried to act against him. Plus, he actually adopted repressive policies, as I said, arresting many senior members of the royal family, and each of them is now simply intimidated, if not frightened. The second dimension that I'm analyzing is the domestic politics. And he has been even more revolutionary here. because from the very beginning, as you know, in the last 280 years since the first Saudi state came into being, the state was based on two pillars, the Saudi family and the Wahhabi ideology. And until now, until recently, the Wahhabi religious establishment was in charge of all aspects of domestic life. Any aspect that you mention, education, the legal system, gender segregation, the morality police, tourism, entertainment, sports, anything. The Wahhabi establishment was in charge. And abruptly, MbS changed all this. He took their power away. And I'm not going to go into details, but it's enough that you know the headline. Depriving the Wahhabi establishment of the power they have enjoyed, you may say, for 280 years, since 1745. If you look at these two dimensions together, royal family politics and domestic politics, you see two big power centers in Saudi Arabia, princes and clerics, senior princes, Saudi royal princes, and very distinguished clerics, both of whom were deprived of their power. So when I say that in both respects, MbS was revolutionary and transformative, in the same breath, I have to warn and to alert you to the possibility that these two centers of power might, at some point in the future, get together and present a real challenge to his autocracy, to his authoritative regime, to the loner that he is. Both are disgruntled, both are deprived of their power. Maybe both of them are still in a state of shock, but one should not exclude the possibility. And I would think that, being a smart person, MbS is taking it into consideration that at some point he would have to attend to such two potential centers of opposition. Something that might fundamentally affect the stability and the survivability of his regime. Moving now to the third dimension, the economy. I'm sure you all know about Vision 2030, about NEOM, about the mega projects. And you know, in Saudi Arabia under MbS, there are no more projects. Each project is a mega project at the frantic pace of spending, at the expansion, diversification of the economy, which all show that he has a vision. He is acting out of understanding that in order to enter the 21st century, the country cannot rely solely on oil. And after all attempts, and in case you didn't know, I've been a student of Saudi Arabia for 50 years, and I can tell you that in each 5-year plan that economists drew for the Saudis, each 5-year plan, one of the most important, the top goals was diversification of the economy. After 50 years, I have to tell you that it's almost a total failure. And this is what MbS is doing primarily in order to change the basic name of the game, diversification. And to do that, he needs huge investments from the West and high technology and cooperation in terms of science, of technology, and education. So until now, for I would say since 2015, what I just described is how MbS acted. frantic expansion, as if we don't have time, we have to rush. Something has changed. Something very important has changed in the last year or two. What we see is that he is telling his ministries and people that you have to, how should I say, slash spending. He's talking in terms of a belt tightening. And I can give you a quote that there was an instruction from him to the various departments of his government saying, we have to spend the kingdom's money responsibly, which you may say that is an admission that until now, I have spent the kingdom's money irresponsibly. So there is a big change from the way he behaves now to the first 7 or 8 years since he became the ruler of the kingdom. The last and the fourth and the last dimension is foreign relations, foreign policy, which might interest you more than all others. And here the differences are very distinct. And I will simply give you a few examples of the first 5, 6, 7 years, and then show the turning point, the differences that started about two years ago and are really now very predominant. You all know about the catastrophes. Right after he became, I'm calling it de facto ruler, even before becoming crown prince, he was Minister of Defense in 2015 at age 29 with zero experience. And he launched this catastrophic war against Yemen. Estimates are that the war cost Saudi Arabia $200 billion. And you probably know that it ended in total humiliation. After 5 or 6 years, he understood that there's no way he can win the war, and that's it. He withdrew unilaterally in humiliation. Number 2, Qatar. MbS has been an enemy of Qatar, and 2 years, actually the year he became crown prince, he led the other Persian Gulf states into a boycott, a formal boycott, a blockade over Qatar, being sure that the cumulative power of these entities would be enough to bring Qatar to its knees and to accept, to follow the line of the Gulfies, as we call them. Well, after 4 years, in 2021, he had to declare defeat. He invited the Qatari emir to a conference, to a summit in Al Ula in northern Saudi Arabia. He welcomed him at the airport there, kissing him on both cheeks. And for all practical purposes, it was an admission of not just failure, but defeat. Some of you might remember the humiliating and ridiculous phenomenon in 2017 when Prime Minister of Lebanon, Al-Hariri, came to Saudi Arabia on a visit, and MbS had him arrested. He didn't let him leave and forced him to resign as Prime Minister, hoping that this will put pressure, weaken the Hezbollah and weaken Iran and so on and so forth. There was a global outcry. Of course, he had to release him, and that was again humiliation. And of course, then came the biggest humiliation of all, the 2018 killing, murdering, and then dismemberment of the journalist Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, which gave Saudi Arabia in general and MbS in particular the worst PR all over the world. The most important front, Iran. I don't know how many of you would remember that just a few years ago, MbS called Khamenei Hitler, modern day Hitler. And he called the Iranian regime a Nazi regime. And now, in 2023, with the mediation of China, Saudi Arabia restored relations with Iran, with the same people they called Nazis and Hitler. And in a minute, we'll come to the reasons. And one more example of change, MbS, by instincts, would be like most Saudi royal princes, anti-Russian, anti-Chinese, pro-American, and so on and so forth. So for the first few years, he would try to avoid Russia, to avoid China. And now, in the last 2 years, he's coming to the point where he's considering joining the Russian-Chinese-sponsored BRICS economic group, which is viewed by the West as anti-Western, anti-American. And in doing all these things, the first 6, 7, 8 years reflect his revolutionary transformative character. The withdrawal, taking a step back and reversing course in almost all examples that I showed you, means that he understands now politics. What he has done in the first years is totally antithetical to the traditional Saudi pattern of behavior in foreign relations. I have said for decades, when asked what is the guiding principle of Saudi Arabia, and my answer was, look at the name of their currency. It's Rial. So their foreign policy is guided by realpolitik, not just real, the money, but realism. And a major part of realism was that you have to see which country threatens you, and if you don't have the power to confront them, if you can't fight them, join them. You have to be on good relations with your enemies, hedging. And that's what he has been doing in the last 2 years with China and Russia. Last point here is on the Palestinian-Israeli. After the Abraham Accords were signed in 2020, rumors started to circulate that Saudi Arabia would next. They will join in 2021, 22. For the first time ever, MbS met with Bibi Netanyahu, not in Israel, but in northern Saudi Arabia, near Neom, the new city, the mega city. And the rumors were that he's about to normalize relations, and there were even small steps taken in that direction. I say small, for some it's even more than small. Saudi Arabia opened its airspace to Israel's commercial flights, L.L.B, on its flights from Tel Aviv, not only to Dubai and to Abu Dhabi, but also to India. That shortened the flight by about 30%. Saudi Arabia, under the table, started also cooperating with Israeli high-tech companies, buying, especially in the cyber area, cyber and security areas. And most important, when the issue of normalization was brought up, the conventional wisdom was that if Israel would say something or agrees in principle to move in the direction of a two-state solution, that would be enough for Saudi Arabia. Now, in 24, it's a totally different ballgame. Not just guessing or analyzing. Saudi foreign minister in writing, and in writing makes a lot more importance than just talking in an interview, because every word is counted. In an article in Financial Times last month, he wrote the following: Palestinian statehood is a prerequisite for peace rather than its byproduct. Palestinian statehood is the only path that can lead us out of this cycle of violence. And the question is, of course, what are the reasons for the shift in Saudi policy over the Palestinian-Israeli issue and over Iran and all the others? I would mention 4 reasons very briefly in order of importance, the way I look at them. Number 1 has to do with Iran. Iran has been perceived by MbS in the last 2 years as an ascendant power, emboldened by its close relations with Russia and China, no least by the fact that Russia depends on Iranian drones to attack civilian population in Kiev every night. For example, just last night, 50 drones, armed drones, were launched into Kiev and Kharkov. So Iran has been on the ascendant. It became a major power. And if you add to it its proxies all over the Middle East, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, that's a major regional power that Saudi Arabia cannot ignore. Hence, resumptions of relations, no more Hitler. Number 2, at least if MbS could feel that he has a clear-cut security umbrella from the United States, but he doesn't feel he has one. And in a minute, I'll show you why. So without such a clear-cut American umbrella, there is no way MbS can challenge the enemies around him, first and foremost, Iran. Number 3, as a result of October 7th, MbS has been deeply disappointed by what he perceived as the lack of Israeli military superiority and military deterrence and strategic advantages that he has attached to Israel all the time. So the combination of Iran, no American umbrella, plus disappointment at Israel, all 3 were very important. And to this, you have to add a 4th domestic dimension. As the war in Gaza has been continuing for a year with scores of thousands of casualties, pro-Palestinian sentiments in Saudi Arabia have increasingly grown, day by day. And even though he is an autocratic leader, even dictators and tyrants have to take into consideration domestic popular sentiments. So the net result is a change in terms of this. A few words about the US, and we will stop. I'm saying it because we are on the eve of American elections, and I've been constantly asked, who does MbS prefer? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? So I'll answer. I'll give you. I'll simply cite 3 facts and explain and give you the answer. When Saudis look back at 3 American administrations in the past, in the most immediate past, the answer is very simple. The 8 years of Obama from 2009 to 2016 were a major disappointment, especially because of the JCPOA. The Saudis felt about the agreement exactly like Israel. But unlike Israel or Netanyahu, who went to Congress and challenged Obama publicly, their modus operandi, as I said before, the traditional one, is to be nice, to be diplomatic, to be polite. to express dissatisfaction under the table and not to come up with challenging statements. But they were opposed to it. The 8 years of Obama were considered a very bad period for Saudi Arabia. Then came Trump in January 2017, and Saudi Arabia had great hopes. 3 months after coming to power, Trump paid a major visit to Saudi Arabia. It was not just a visit, it was a celebration. And when I looked at this picture, this is called the Saudi sword dance. I cannot show you videos here enough, but I really don't understand how the Secret Service allowed Trump to participate in this dance, because what you saw was dozens of Saudis, all of them flashing swords long like this, in the face of Trump. All it took was for one to kill him. But he participated in this sword dance, and I said jokingly at the time that Trump was dancing with the Saudis sheik to sheik, and there were many sheiks in the audience. So the Saudi hopes were high, and in 2018, when the Trump administration withdrew from the JCPOA, the Saudis were even more elated because they were hoping that this was the beginning of a real change towards Iran. They were totally disappointed. And look at the two events which took place just a year later. The first one, please, the second image, was in June 2019. Over international waters near the Persian Gulf, a top-of-the-line American drone, cost was $200 million of such drone, was shot down by Iran on international water, over international water. The Saudis expected the US to intervene right away, and indeed, Trump sent F-15, F-16, I can't remember which airplanes, within several hours, but 10 minutes later, he withdrew them. The Saudis could not understand how America did not retaliate. But there were much worse news for them only 3 months later. Please, the third one. In September, Iran launched a major attack using rockets and armed drones on the most major oil facilities of Saudi Arabia. To understand the magnitude of the challenge, 55% of Saudi oil production was knocked down, more than half of Saudi oil production. Now, for decades, the basis of Saudi-American relations, the basis was framed in 2 sentences, in 2 words. Saudi oil for American security. So this was not only a breach by Trump, this was a major historical breach since the days of Ibn Saud and FDR. America did not retaliate, did not do anything, and this was Trump, not Obama. To this day, this picture is so vivid in Saudi Arabia, you don't see too much in the West anymore, but this is day and night on the minds of Saudi leaders. So when we come to the question, who do they prefer? My answer is that I don't know, because I'm not sure that they know. They can't figure, they know, they're afraid, I should say, or they're concerned that a Kamala Harris administration would be more like Biden and Obama, which they didn't like, and a Donald Trump, because he's unpredictable. Look at the 2 things which he didn't do anything about, and we don't know what he will do. Maybe because he's close to Russia, and Russia is now in alliance with Iran, he would not be so good for Saudi Arabia as we might have thought. So my answer is that they are very ambivalent about it. They fear both of them, and they really don't know what will happen. The bottom line is that in the first two dimensions, royal family politics and the domestic politics, MbS has persisted in the same line from the very beginning till today. In the economy and foreign relations, he has taken a big step backwards, understanding his limits, the limits of Saudi Arabia and his limits personally. But one thing we can know for sure, MbS is devoid of any ideology. He is not attached to the Wahhabi establishment at all. And now he showed in the last 2 years that he is flexible and knows how to adjust, how to revise, how to reshape policies based on understanding. But for sure, he is driven by pragmatism and not by any ideology. I know I went over time, but I hope it was educational. And if we have time, we'll open it to a Q&A.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That was very informative. We have gone a little over time, but I do want to take a few minutes to get some audience questions in. We've got plenty of them pouring in. I'll start with one from international lawyer Andrew Rosemarine, based in the UK, who asks, Iran is wooing MbS with some recent success. What must the United States and Israel do in order to keep them apart?
Well, you don't expect me to give another lecture, but this time it will last for an hour and a half. I don't know what, but my next Zoom lecture in the US next week is exactly on the challenges that will face the new administration. And number one on the agenda was that America must totally overhaul and reassess its policies towards Iran, because of the nuclear danger, because its participation in wars. It has changed and is now willing to confront Israel directly. Think about it, a country launching 330 missiles, rockets, drones, and what was the fourth one? Cruise missiles in one night in October. And now again, ballistic missiles, 181. And in the last 4 days, warnings and threats from Iran that this time Iran's response will be on a much higher level, causing more damage and so on and so forth. So it's not enough for America to continue with the policy of de-escalation, preventing war. De-escalation, with all due respect, is not a strategy, is not a policy. Because sometimes de-escalate, meaning giving your opponent the opportunity to arm itself and to reach a stage where it would be too late for you to confront. I don't want to repeat the lessons of the 1930s because there are a lot of differences, but there are certain respects that resemble the 1930s. Definitely the Munich Agreement of Chamberlain and so on and so forth. And I would submit to you that the stakes are now even higher, not because Iran is as powerful as Germany, but because of the new element of nuclear. This was not the case in 1939. Now we know that Iran is getting closer and closer and closer to the nuclear. So all I can say now is that there is not just a need, but a must for a total reassessment of American policy towards Iran.
Thank you. Now, on a similar note, David Levine asks if, and perhaps when, Saudi Arabia finally signs a peace agreement with Israel, what would the immediate consequences be for Israel and the greater Middle East?
We are now much further away from normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia than we were 2 or 3 years ago, because of all the 4 reasons that I mentioned: an ascendant Iran, lack of belief, confidence in American umbrella, disappointment at Israel. And here I should add, I didn't mention it before, maybe the military performance of Israel in the last 2 months of killing the entire upper command of Hezbollah, of Nasrallah himself, of killing Sinwar and death and the top echelon there, and the attack that they were able to launch in Iran just, when was this? Only 10 days ago, knocking down all four Soviet-supplied S-300 air defense system and so on and so forth. It's still an open question. I can't really tell. It's too early. Whether there has been any change in the Saudi mindset as to Israel restoring its deterrence, its strategic advantages to make Saudi Arabia increase its belief in Israeli military capabilities. And the fourth, and we cannot ignore that, in all public opinion polls in Saudi Arabia, there are such pro-Palestinian sentiments as a result of the war and the devastation in Gaza that it will be very difficult for MbS to simply ignore that. But since the question was posed, I'll tell you what the best scenario for Saudi Arabia could be. Number one, if there is an end to the war in Gaza, the Palestinian Authority goes in to replace Hamas with some kind of an Arab peacekeeping force consisting of troops from the UAE, from Qatar, from other countries. And that would be the beginning, could be, of a peace process if indeed Israel would somehow put back on the table its agreement in principle to the two-state solution, and the US and the EU and the Arab states would go back to the Arab peace plan of 2002, when this was originally, by the way, a Saudi plan of Crown Prince Abdullah at the time of 2002, saying that the Arab world is ready to normalize relations if the Palestinian problem is resolved, and so on and so forth. And there is a regional alliance that is ready to confront Iran. And this regional alliance would feel that they have a security umbrella from the United States. If all these elements can mature and crystallize at some point, that would pave the way. And to answer the question directly, if there is a normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, I think this would be one of the most important developments in the Middle East in general, in the Arab-Israeli conflict in particular, no less important than the first Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty of 1979. A mega change. It could be a transformative step.
All right, thank you very much. I think we have time for one more here. And this one actually just came in from an anonymous attendee who asks, given the tumultuous power transitions in the kingdom and the ups and downs in foreign and domestic policies, should we be concerned about the potential for an assassination attempt on Mohammed bin Salman?
Well, I have to share with you something that happened 1979. That's how many years? 45 years. There was a meeting in a certain organization. I wouldn't mention the name. It was right after the revolution in Iran took place. And it was after the Grand Mosque in Mecca was taken over by Saudi fundamentalists. Some of you probably don't remember enough. You weren't even born then, maybe, but others might remember. There was fear in the Middle East. I quote, Saudi Arabia is next. In other words, after the royal family, the Shah of Iran was deposed, Saudi Arabia is next. Is going to fall. And there was a meeting, and most of the participants agreed that there is now a snowball and they're going to go down. I was the only one in the audience who totally rejected that analysis. I said that it is based on faulty basis, that there is a comparison between the Shah of Iran and the Saudi royal family, and we will not go into it. I mentioned no less than 10 major historical, political, demographic, royal family dynamics that are different between the two countries. And I ventured to predict that the Saudi royal family is safe for the medium and some long term, I said, for the next decade. Well, it has been 45 years since then, and they're still in power. But because of what I just described in my presentation, that MbS does not follow the traditional dynamics of the royal family, of consensus, of consultation. I did not mention, I did not have the time, but Saudi power moved from one brother to another for 60 years. Each brother represented another branch of the royal family. So all of them could say that, well, we share in power, we participate, all our branches. MbS might be breaking that principle too, because power from now on will be only in one branch, the Sudairi branch. And within the Sudairi, maybe, it depends on who he will appoint as his crown prince once he becomes a king, but most likely it could be his son. So that will break all the principles underlying the Saudi succession dynamics. Instead of being all branches being represented, it will be only in one branch. So because of this, I would say that MbS, in his modus operandi, has opened the possibility at some point in the future for upheavals within the royal family, something that I did not predict ever in the last 45 years. It could be, and it could be that the royal family is still in a state of shock, but at some point I would say that young princes might recover from shock and they could have potential partners. The partners are the clerics, the Wahhabi establishment, which is also deprived of its power. So that combination of Saudi Wahhabi, now not in power, but in opposition, is the major threat that could face. If I were his advisor, I would advise him to mend fences with people who might become his opponents and threaten his throne.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Now we have unfortunately reached the end of our podcast for this week. I want to thank you again, Professor Goldberg, for taking the time for your presentation this week.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Now, for our viewers and listeners, please join us on Wednesday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time for our Israel Insider podcast with Ashley Perry. And if you have not done so already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch this series as well as over 400 of our past podcast episodes. We thank you all again for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.
Thank you.